Bruce. Thanks a million for being here and sharing with us your knowledge about design thinking. So instead of me doing a really bad job at introducing you, please tell us who you are and why we should listen to you talk about design thinking.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the quick introduction there, Eric. My name is Bruce Gay. I'm a project management professional. I've been working in the field now for over 20 years. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the United States. For the past 15 years, I've been working with teams that have incorporated human-centered design and design thinking into their product development and software development practices. Let me talk about some of the things that I recommend for utilizing design thinking. And so design thinking at its core has being able to take concepts out of your head and making them real. So being able to build prototypes, being able to share ideas in a physical form, whether it be a whiteboard or if it's something physical, is very important. So that's one. A second thing about design thinking is that it's very collaborative. This is not an activity that should be done on an individual basis, but more having a group of individuals who have various disciplines and viewpoints as to how to tackle a problem and to move forward. And then third, one of the other key things that makes design thinking very useful is that there is the practice of taking what's being built in a prototype form and then testing that with your intended user, customer, or the general public, and then taking that feedback and then bringing that back into the further development of the product or service. So Eric has pointed out to me that this is a workshop that he is running with the class that is utilizing a game to be able to design a game, and this will use design thinking and as well other methodologies. And one of the things that I encourage you as you get started into this, make sure that you understand who your audience is. Who is going to be using this game? Is this going to be university students that are also business students? Will this be university students that are more on the art side of the house? And I think that will inform how you build out this game and design for it. And then second, Eric pointed out that the teams will need to come to a decision as to which learning outcome that they want to focus on. And this is another key element with thinking, is spending the time to not only understand your users and your customers, but also spend the time to make sure you're focusing on the right problem. So I would encourage the teams to think through and even down select where they're going to want to focus, which learning outcome they want to focus on, because that is going to be critical and lays the groundwork for the rest of this project.
Yeah, Bruce, I wanted to mention there that the teams or the actual testing is done in groups. So they will be working in groups of maximum 3, 4, depending on the number of students and how they can get together. Because, you know, during these times of Corona, people may have to work remotely. So testing, there is also a little bit of difficulty there that we need to overcome. But also, when it comes to the learning outcome, there is a list of learning outcomes that the lecturer, Alexandra, has given us, and the students will be working with that. Nonetheless, and here is a question for you, we fear that at some points, the learning outcomes may be too broad, and the students may struggle to create a game out of this particular learning outcome. So what we propose is that sometimes even the learning outcome can be broken down into smaller learning outcomes, and that's what they can focus on. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, no, I think that's typically how things progress within design thinking too. You start off with what is a future state or what is the problem we want to tackle, and as you do the research, you do, as you pointed out, you'll sub-task or you'll have sub-components within the other learning outcomes. So I think that, and the way that the teams can choose these subtasks, first you have to come up and identify them, but then you can choose them. You can do that through a survey. You can do that with back and forth dialogue with the lecturer. There's different ways of doing this, and it could even be just voting. And So that definitely makes sense. You want to be able to get it to a point where you have a concrete learning outcome that you can start designing and building prototypes for. If it's too broad, as you pointed out, Eric, people will get stuck and there'll be a lot of, there won't be forward progress.
Yeah, and another question, maybe this more from your experience rather than from the theory part. How many times have you seen that an idea fails on the first iteration, and then people just have to completely throw it away and start from scratch?
Yeah, no. I cannot say I've seen 100% failure, but what I have seen is when we do, when we've worked, I'm in the medical field, so we work with doctors. We've taken our designs and they've been on paper, and those designs are then shared with the doctors, they're shared with the nurses. And there have been times when there's been a lot of red ink from, no, this isn't going to be appropriate, or we need to change this. And so that the fact that we had those designs on paper and interacted with our customers allowed us to basically say we're not going to work on this aspect of a software system. So exactly. It wasn't 100%, but it allowed us to say this is not valuable.
And that's a point that I also mentioned during the videos for the first iteration, that identifying what doesn't work through the use of simple elements such as paper and whiteboards.
Perfect.
No, but it's beautiful. It saves the designing team time, and it saves the company tons of money as well.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's better to identify things that don't work in that phase when it's still on paper. And it can be very quickly, once you start getting people who are building things, whether they be hardware engineers or software engineers, then it becomes very expensive. So yeah, exactly right, Eric. It's better to understand what not to do early on in the process when it's still paper prototype in that case.
Exactly. So the next point you mentioned regarding the advice you wanted to share with us today, because you mentioned about the idea and the fact that the teams need to collaborate, and you mentioned as well going from prototype then all the way to a more structured or stronger prototype, and eventually to a product that can be potentially shipped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. So I think that as you move from the initial, what is the initial goal, or in this case the learning concept, testing a first iteration, testing that with a solo user, or then testing it with groups. I think what is key is being able to run that test and collect data from that test. What are the lessons learned? What is it that the user or the customer likes or dislikes? This will also help the teams better understand and get inside the head of the people who will be playing the game. I think that by the third iteration, hopefully by that point, you'll know your customer and the user of the game much better than you did at the beginning of this whole process.
Amazing. Perfect. I love this advice. But I have a question for you. And this is regarding listening to the customer. And sometimes what happens is that we listen too much as well to the development team because we think we have great ideas. And what happens in your experience when there is a team that really, for example, in the case of the game, they say they want to work with something and they test it and they don't get the results they want, but they still believe that this.
Yeah, no, and so there's a whole field out there on bias, and so this is one of those where you will get a bias, and there's one in this particular instance you've discussed. There is I think it's called big voice bias, where in a group that's doing or creating something, there could be one individual that has a very large voice and they influence things in one direction or the other. But if you are working with a for-profit commercial organization, that is not going to be the behavior you want to expect from your team.
Exactly. So I guess that's when the maturity of let's call it the project leader or even the whole organization comes into place, because they're able to identify these behaviors in a team that is listening to, as you say, What was the bias you mentioned? Because I wrote in my piece of paper,
The
loud,
big voice. Yep.
the big voice. I wrote in here, loud project member.
Yeah. Big voice. Yeah.
Exactly. So
That's very common.
definitely. Bruce, I think we are coming to the end of my 30 minutes in Zoom, and I don't know if the Zoom will end or not. So I don't want to risk it. And so you mentioned working through the ideas, perhaps even doing voting and survey. I suppose this is to identify better the learning outcome the group wants to work with, right?
Correct. Yep.
So,
But that can be used during these iteration phases too.
oh,
Um,
okay.
as more and more people are testing, you can use voting. You can use surveys to solicit the feedback during the testing phase. So it's another small method. Typically, if it's time constraint, you just ask the people who you've been testing, what do you like, what do you not like, what would you recommend? And you
Okay,
can something as simple as that to get the feedback.
perfect. And the next points you mentioned as well was the collaboration in the team. And I think this is a bit self-explanatory, but sometimes not so much so, because
Mm-hmm.
in the teams, there's going to be nobody who's above nobody. They're going to be all equal partners.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, they have to produce something.
Yep. Yeah. No. And the collaboration. And so again, that's very important. And this is having a diversity of thought. So everybody brings their background. They may be from different cultures, different countries, speak different languages. That is going to be important, and that helps with the going through this process. What I try to enforce with my company is including people from other departments that would be involved, and typically someone from support or someone from upfront from legal. And they bring a very different mindset than just the normal program team that we have. And sometimes it's a question or two from somebody will cause a lot of creativity to come out of that. So.
Exactly. And the final point regarding prototyping and collecting data. So in this case, Bruce, what I did, given the fact that the iterations are very short, was to provide a tool, really simple tool, that allows the students, when they're prototyping the game, to identify 5 behaviors that they see on the players. Because
Okay.
when it comes to game design, I'm not sure about other fields, but when it comes to game design, sometimes it's a really bad idea to ask people what they like, because they
Oh,
probably want to change completely your game. So
yeah. No. And that is true. No, you obviously have a very what do you call it? A very expert view of surveying and interviewing people. It is very basic to just say, what do you like? You're right. That's good. I like the idea of a tool, because then it puts some barriers and guardrails, as we call them, around what the tester and the person who's being tested in the survey, what they can respond with.
exactly. And sometimes we are also collecting these sort of open-ended questions, but the main data that are encouraging the students as testers and developers, developers, is that watch out the testers, their behaviors and reactions when they're playing the game. So for example, what the survey that I constructed, if you can call it a survey, is a simple form. And when they see for example, the players going like, oh, what is this? That's a behavior. That's a behavior that they can collect, and it's called the bored's behavior. And for example, it goes from extremely excited, when people kind of go like this and get up because the game is so excited that they really want to know who's going to kill who. But it goes to the other end, which is when people may just get either too bored or angry because the mechanics of the game may contradict themselves, or maybe they really don't enjoy the game that much. So in that spectrum, is where they collect data for a specific mechanic or a specific moment in the game, and they know that they have to work with that for the next iteration.
I see. No, that's good. No, collecting data at that level, that's a very robust way of doing it, and it sounds good. You're going to be able to do comparison over time, so that's excellent.
Exactly. So Bruce, now I do believe we are on the mark for the Zoom meeting. So I really
All
want to
right.
thank you for sharing your time and sharing your experience.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, and I want to say as well that I didn't mention at the beginning that it was a pleasure meeting you face to face, and that's how I came to know you in Dublin in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Project Management Institute conference. Yeah,
No. And it's yeah. So I hope you're doing well. You're still in Krakow. Is that where you are?
exactly. Yes,
Excellent. Yeah.
yes.
No. And it's this was going to be another travel year for me, and like it's at home, all home. Oh my God. Hey, Eric. Hey, I'm glad it reach out to me if you ever need this sort of stuff again. This is good. So thank you.
Will do, Bruce. Thanks a million for this.
All right. Have a good one.
You too, you too. Bye.
Bye.